Jason was never supposed to fit in. But when his violin played louder than the world's judgment, everything changed. Watch how one note can shatter expectations and rewrite his story. The first note screeched, and the air seemed to hold its breath. The room was thick with tension, a silent promise of what was to come. Jason Thompson, the scholarship student at Lincoln Academy, felt the cold gaze of his classmates on him as the music hall's polished wooden floor creaked under his feet. He was supposed to be nothing more than a background player in their world. Just another poor kid who barely belonged. His second-hand uniform a constant reminder of his station in life. But as the teacher's eyes glinted with thinly veiled amusement, Jason knew he was about to make them regret every moment of their cruel expectations. The recital was supposed to be his humiliation. Jason wasn't supposed to stand out. He was never supposed to rise above the position they had assigned him. Lincoln Academy had its rules, its traditions, and its hierarchy, and someone like Jason, black from a broken family and on a scholarship, was always meant to be invisible. The heads of the school had set the trap. The music hall filled with the faces of the wealthy students, their expensive suits and designer shoes a stark contrast to the worn jacket Jason wore. They thought they had set him up for failure. They believed the humiliation would break him. But as Jason closed his eyes and took a deep breath, something inside him snapped. His fingers found their way to the violin strings, as if they had always known where to go. The next note sliced through the air with such perfection that even the teacher, Mr. Ellis, flinched. Jason's posture straightened, his shoulders relaxed, and suddenly the music wasn't just music. It was a declaration. It was vengeance. The room, so full of smug faces, paled as the violin's melody filled the space, shocking, defiant, and impossibly beautiful. No one had expected this. They had invited him to play, thinking they were controlling the stage, but now Jason was in control. One note at a time, he dismantled their assumptions, showing them what talent really looked like, and proving that some voices, no matter how quiet they start, are destined to be heard. As the final note hung in the air, Jason's fingers trembled for only a moment before he lowered the violin, the bow gently resting against its strings. The room remained silent, the air thick with disbelief. He opened his eyes to find the faces around him had drained of color. Mr. Ellis, who had been watching with a smirk just moments before, stood frozen, unable to mask his surprise. The other students, those privileged, perfect students who had thought this was just another recital for them to mock, sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. Jason, feeling his pulse race, took a deep breath, tried to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Anger, pride, fear, it all mixed together in a tide of feelings he had spent years suppressing. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to have this moment. But here it was. The music had done something he couldn't have predicted. And yet, as the silence stretched on, a voice cut through it, soft but unmistakable. That was incredible. Jason looked up to see Amanda Cruz, a girl from the advanced class who usually sat on the other side of the room. She was the first to speak, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Slowly, others began to murmur in agreement. Some shuffled in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. Jason's chest tightened, but he refused to let his vulnerability show. This wasn't about them. It was about him. It was about reclaiming what they had tried to take from him, about proving that someone from his background, someone like him, could belong here just as much as anyone else. When he left the stage, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew the shift had already happened. The crowd of privileged faces was no longer as sure of their superiority. For once, the power had shifted. And Jason knew, deep in his bones, that this was just the beginning. The next morning, Jason awoke long before his alarm, the first rays of sunlight slipping through the blinds of his small apartment. It was 5 a.m., but he didn't need the clock to know it was time. He had learned long ago that these early hours, before the world demanded anything from him, were his alone. Quietly, he slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb his mother in the next room. She worked late nights, cleaning offices, and had just gotten home hours ago. She needed her rest more than anything. The apartment was modest. 2 cramped bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room that doubled as a dining area. But it was home. The walls were covered with photos. his mom's high school graduation picture, his own when he was 6, holding his first violin, the same one that had carried him through all these years. And then there was a picture of his grandfather, a proud man with a violin in hand, smiling in front of a smoky jazz club backdrop. Jason ran his fingers over the frame, a sense of comfort washing over him. It had always been about family. And now, it was his turn to make that violin sing. He walked to the corner of his room, where the old violin case sat on his desk. The leather was cracked, the name Elijah Thompson faded on the worn tag. He opened the case slowly, reverently, as if unveiling a hidden treasure. The violin wasn't new. It wasn't a fancy instrument, but to Jason, it was priceless. This violin had seen decades of music, from his grandfather's jazz melodies to the classical pieces that Jason now played. It had witnessed their struggles and triumphs, and now it was his to carry forward. Sitting down, he positioned the violin under his chin, his fingers sliding effortlessly into place. He closed his eyes and let the music take over. The notes of Bach filled the room, swirling around him, filling the space with their beauty. For these few moments, Jason wasn't a scholarship student struggling to fit in at a wealthy academy. He wasn't a kid from the wrong side of town. He was simply a musician, lost in his craft, in his art, in his family's legacy. The smell of coffee and toasted bread wafted through the apartment, signaling that it was time to face the day. But for now, Jason savored the peace, the quiet confidence that music brought him. He was ready to take on whatever the world, or Lincoln Academy, threw at him next. Jason sat at the small kitchen table, his mother bustling around him, preparing breakfast with practiced ease. Naomi Thompson had always made the mornings feel like a small celebration, even on the days when everything felt like it was slipping through their fingers. Her smile was warm, though Jason noticed a familiar crease between her brows. She'd been working double shifts at the local diner, cleaning offices at night, just to make sure they could keep the lights on. Jason hated that she had to carry all of that weight alone. "Morning, kiddo," she said, her voice still laced with sleep, but filled with a quiet strength. "Morning, Mom," Jason replied, offering a soft smile as he sat down and grabbed the toast she set in front of him. Naomi didn't let on how exhausted she was. Her hands moved deftly, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, like she hadn't worked a 12-hour shift the night before. She slid into her own chair, picking up a cup of coffee. Her gaze flickered to the stack of bills she'd just hidden under a cookbook, as if trying to make them disappear by force of will. But Jason saw it all. He knew the nights she spent lying awake, wondering how long they could keep pretending everything was fine. Jason didn't say anything about it. He never did. Instead, he broke the silence with a ritual they had every morning, one positive thought to start the day. He chewed a bite of toast and leaned back, ready to share. "I nailed that Bach passage I was working on last night," he said, his voice light but with a touch of pride. Naomi's eyes brightened at once. "That's amazing, Jason. I knew you could do it. You got something special, you know that?" Jason smiled at the praise, but he didn't fully believe it. Not when the rest of the world seemed determined to remind him that he didn't belong. But hearing his mother say it, he wanted to believe it for her. "Your turn," he said, taking another bite. Naomi squeezed his hand, the familiar gesture that had always been her quiet way of giving him strength. "My positive thought is the same as always," she said, her smile unwavering. "You're going to make it, Jason. You're going to do great things. Your music will take you farther than anything else ever could." Her words settled into his chest, heavy and warm. For a moment, Jason let himself believe it, just for her. As he finished his breakfast, he felt a quiet confidence wash over him. Maybe she was right. Maybe this small corner of the world where they could still share a meal, was all he needed to keep going. Later that afternoon, Jason found himself standing outside the music department, waiting for his turn to practice. The final bell had rung, and students were already scattering to their next activities. Most of them were picked up in sleek luxury cars or headed off to after-school sessions with private tutors or sports coaches. Jason didn't belong in that world. Not really. His mom's old sedan, with its faded paint and dented fender, was always the last to pull up to the curb, a quiet reminder of how far removed he was from the lives of the other kids. As he stood there, a few students glanced at him, whispering to each other in low tones. Jason could almost hear their thoughts. Scholarship kid, not really one of us. It didn't matter that he was as good, if not better, than most of them at the violin. To them, he would always be the outsider. They didn't know that music was all he had, the thing that made him feel like he truly belonged anywhere. Just then, Mr. Reynolds, the head of the music department, walked past, an odd glint in his eyes. "Jason, you're up next for the recital," he said, his tone almost too casual, as though it were no big deal. Jason didn't know what to make of it. It felt like a setup. The recital was supposed to showcase the talent of the school's best, the ones with perfect families and expensive instruments. Not someone like him. As Jason made his way toward the practice room, he overheard a few snickers. "He's going to make a fool of himself," one voice said. It was Ethan Morgan, of course, sitting front and center in every class and every performance, always the first to remind everyone of his privilege. Jason clenched his fists, fighting the urge to respond. He wasn't here to prove anything to Ethan or anyone else. He was here for himself, and for his mother, who had given everything to help him get this far. When he opened the door to the practice room, he expected to find it empty, but to his surprise, Ethan and two other students were already inside, the room now filled with a smug energy. "What's the matter, Jason?" Ethan sneered, glancing up from his violin. "Didn't you see the schedule?" Jason looked at the schedule on the wall. It was clear that the room had been reserved for him, but Ethan didn't care. They had already set up, already claimed the space. A pang of frustration tightened in Jason's chest, but he didn't let it show. He could already hear his grandfather's voice in his head. "Don't let them see you sweat." So, without a word, Jason walked to the corner of the room, pulled out his violin, and started tuning it with quiet precision. Let them think what they wanted. Today, the music would speak for him. The next day, Jason found himself walking to the halls of Lincoln Academy, still reeling from the tension of the previous day's practice. His mind was a whirlwind of uncertainty, but as he walked past lockers and classrooms, a strange thing happened. His steps felt heavier. Every whisper, every sideways glance seemed to settle into his chest like a weight. It wasn't just the regular stares he'd grown used to. This time, something else lingered in the air. He was about to turn the corner when a voice caught his attention. "Hey, Jason," said Olivia Franklin, a girl he'd seen around but never really spoken to. She had transferred in only a few weeks ago, and while she kept to herself, Jason had noticed something different about her. She didn't fit the typical mold of the wealthy, entitled students at Lincoln Academy. Olivia stepped in front of him, her expression serious. "I saw what happened in the practice room yesterday," she said, her voice low, "and I just wanted to tell you that was incredible." Jason blinked, unsure of how to respond. Thanks," he muttered, shifting his weight awkwardly. He wasn't used to this kind of attention from someone like her, someone who seemed to belong here, unlike him. She gave him a small, knowing smile. "Don't let them get to you. Ethan Morgan and his crew are all about playing mind games. They think they can rattle you, but it's just a show. You're better than them." Jason hesitated, feeling the familiar sting of self-doubt creep up his spine. He had heard the rumors about Ethan, the golden boy who always got the spotlight. Ethan had everything: wealth, status, a perfect violin, and all the right connections. Jason had none of that, but he still managed to play circles around him. Olivia's words hung in the air, a gentle challenge, like a spark that might ignite something inside him. "Why do you care?" Jason asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged, her eyes steady. "Because I can see real talent when I hear it, and you've got it. Plus, the way they treated you in that practice room, that's just messed up." Jason wasn't sure what to make of it. Olivia wasn't the type to offer praise unless she meant it, and yet there was something more to her words, something that felt like solidarity, like she was standing up for him, in a world where most people wouldn't. "Thanks," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I'll keep that in mind." As Olivia walked away, Jason felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a tiny, stubborn spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone in this fight as he thought. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he might actually stand a chance. The next day, after school, Jason could feel the tension in the air as he approached the music department. The halls, normally bustling with students eager to head to their extracurricular activities, felt strangely quiet. As Jason pushed open the door to the music room, he was greeted by the same smug looks he had come to expect from Ethan and his clique. But this time, something was different. They were not just practicing. They were sitting in a circle, their instruments untouched, whispering among themselves like they were conspiring. Jason felt the familiar knot of anxiety twist in his stomach, but he refused to let them see it. He walked to the corner of the room, set his violin case down, and began to unpack his things. Before he could get started, the door swung open again, and to his surprise, it was Mr. Reynolds, the head of the music department, who had followed him into the room. But this wasn't a normal practice session. Jason's heart skipped a beat when he saw the look on Reynolds' face. Something was off. "We need to talk, Jason," Reynolds said, his voice stern but oddly measured. Jason straightened up, nerves tightening as he wiped his palms on his jeans. "What's this about, Mr. Reynolds?" Jason asked, his voice steady despite the growing pit in his stomach. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward Jason's violin, his eyes scanning it with strange intensity. "I need to examine your instrument. It was brought to my attention that some of your playing, well, it didn't seem quite right yesterday." Jason's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, didn't seem right?" "The tone, the pitch. It was unlike anything we've heard from you in the past." "It was almost as if the violin was altered," Reynolds said, his eyes narrowing. Jason felt a heat rise in his chest. His violin had been handed down through his family. His grandfather had played it in jazz clubs decades ago. There was nothing wrong with it. "I'm sorry, but nothing's wrong with my violin," Jason replied, his voice firm but fighting to hide the anger rising in him. Ethan, who had been sitting at the back of the room, shot him a smug grin. "Maybe your scholarship wasn't enough," he sneered, leaning forward. "Maybe you needed a little extra help to sound so perfect." Jason's fist clenched, and for a brief moment, he felt the urge to lash out, but he didn't. Not now. Not when he knew the truth. He refused to let anyone, especially Ethan, define him by their own insecurities. "I don't need anything but my talent," Jason said coolly, keeping his gaze locked on Reynolds. "If you want to examine my violin, go ahead, but it won't change a thing. You'll still hear the music." There was a tense silence in the room before Reynolds finally nodded, clearly not expecting Jason's defiance. "We'll see about that." But Jason wasn't worried. The music had always spoken louder than any accusations, and he was ready to let it speak for him again. Jason sat alone in the empty music room, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his violin case. The soft hum of fluorescent lights above did little to calm the storm brewing in his mind. The strange, tense conversation with Mr. Reynolds still lingered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan's mocking smile echoed in his head, and he found himself wondering if it would ever stop, this constant need to prove himself. The door creaked open, and Jason looked up to see Daniel Whitmore, the janitor, standing in the doorway. Jason hadn't seen him much outside of his cleaning duties, but Daniel had always struck him as different from the rest of the faculty. There was something genuine about the way he carried himself, even in his faded uniform. Today, though, Daniel was dressed in a clean button-up shirt and slacks, his usual work clothes replaced by something a bit more dignified. "Can I join you for a minute?" Daniel asked, his voice calm and friendly. Jason nodded, a bit surprised. "Sure, I guess." Daniel walked in, closing the door behind him. He didn't seem fazed by the tension in the room. In fact, he seemed to absorb it with an easy-going smile. He walked over to the corner where Jason had been sitting, pulling up a chair and sitting across from him. "Look, Jason," Daniel began, his voice soft but firm, "I know things haven't been easy for you here. The school's got its own way of doing things, and you're not really part of that world. But you've got something they can't touch. You've got talent, and that's worth more than all the privilege in the world." Jason looked at him, his hands still gripping the edge of the violin case. "I don't know anymore, Daniel. I thought this was what I wanted. To be here, to prove I belonged. But now it feels like I'm just a pawn in someone else's game." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes steady. You're not a pawn. You're a player. And you don't have to prove anything to anyone. The music's already done that for you. Jason sighed, the weight of the conversation settling on his shoulders. For the first time in a while, he let himself believe it. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe he didn't have to prove anything at all. His music was his, and that was enough. Well, Daniel said with a smile, standing up to leave, don't let them get to you. You've got more support than you realize. Jason watched him leave, feeling a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was a turning point. It wasn't about fitting in. It was about standing out. And Jason was ready to make sure everyone knew his name. The night of the Young Artist competition arrived, and Jason's stomach twisted in knots. The event was everything he had worked for. But now, standing backstage surrounded by polished instruments and well-dressed students, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. The atmosphere in the concert hall was electric, filled with families, judges, and college representatives, all expecting to witness the next big thing in classical music. And here he was, a kid from the wrong side of town, who had never had the luxury of a private tutor or fancy lessons. All he had was his raw talent, and even that felt like it might not be enough. Jason tightened his grip on his violin case, feeling the weight of expectations. But then he thought of his mother. He thought of all the sacrifices she had made for him, working long hours just to keep them afloat, believing in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And he thought of his grandfather's violin, the instrument that had seen decades of music and struggle, a symbol of perseverance and hope. As he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights nearly blinded him. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the hum of the audience's chatter like a distant wave crashing in his ears. For a moment, he wanted to turn around and run. But then he remembered something Daniel had told him just a few days before. It's not about them, it's about you. With a deep breath, Jason positioned the violin under his chin and began to play. The first notes of his original composition filled the hall, and as his fingers danced across the strings, the nervousness melted away. The music, his music, took over, each note flowing from his heart, his passion, his story. When the final note rang out, the silence in the room felt suffocating. And then, slowly, the applause began soft at first, but growing louder with every passing second. Jason stood there breathless, as the crowd erupted in appreciation. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. In that moment, Jason realized that it wasn't about proving anyone wrong or fighting against a system that didn't want him. It was about embracing who he was and where he came from. Talent, when given the chance, could break through any barrier. He didn't need anyone's approval. He had his own, and that, more than anything, was the true victory. 5 years later, Jason stood at the front of a small community center in his old neighborhood. The same neighborhood where he had once felt so invisible, so out of place. But now, the room was full, chairs packed tightly, folding tables cluttered with snacks and drinks, and the soft murmur of excited chatter filling the air. His heart swelled with pride as he looked out over the sea of eager faces. The children, ranging from 6 to 12 years old, sat expectantly in front of him, their eyes wide with wonder as they clutched their own violins, some of them almost too large for their small frames. It had been a long road to get here, years of practice, setbacks, and moments when he doubted he would ever make it out of the small, cramped apartment he grew up in. But here he was, a Juilliard graduate, an up-and-coming star in the classical music world, standing in front of these kids, ready to pass on the lessons he had learned along the way. Jason took a deep breath and smiled. "All right, listen up, everyone," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Music isn't just about hitting the right notes. It's about the heart, the feeling behind every sound you make. Every time you pick up your violin, you're telling a story that comes from inside you. And no matter where you're from, that story matters." He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the children, many of whom seemed to hang on his every word. "When I was your age, I didn't think people like me were supposed to play music at places like Juilliard. I didn't think I had a shot. But I was wrong. Everyone has a shot. If you're willing to work for it, to believe in yourself even when it feels like the world is telling you no, you'll get there." Jason picked up his own violin, the instrument that had carried him this far, and played a few bars of a song. The sound filled the room, warm and rich. "Now," he said, smiling, "let's see what stories you can tell." As the children began to practice, their awkward first attempts turning into something beautiful, Jason felt something inside him settle, a quiet understanding that this moment was what he had always been working toward. His music had become more than a personal triumph. It was a way to reach out, to inspire, to change the world, one note at a time. And in that moment, Jason knew that everything he had fought for had been worth it.